introduction. So I'm Renee Kerkvliet-Hermans, and I'm the Peatland Code Co-ordinator for the IUCN UK Peatland Programme. Initially, we had hoped that this would be a webinar about the launch of version 2 of the Peatland Code. Unfortunately, there will be an update of where we are at with version 2 of the Peatland Code. And I'll get into a little bit why we're not fully there yet, just in a little bit. But just wanted to quickly touch upon us as the IUCN UK Peatland Programme, because I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with what we do. So as a programme, our vision is for healthy, wildlife-rich peatlands in the UK that provides multiple benefits for people. And we really do that through strong partnership. So we bring together scientists, practitioners, land managers, and policymakers to kind of help and deliver that strategic peatland goals. And we do that through knowledge exchange. So it's all based on scientific consensus. So with peatlands, you're probably all very aware that 80% of our UK peatlands are unfortunately in a degraded state, and they emit more carbon than our forests are actually sequestering every year. So there's a big problem and a big issue there that we need to stop and actually restore these degraded peatlands. However, it's estimated that there's a really big public funding gap to restore all these peatlands of about £560 million. So we really need a private investment to come into place. And just as a highlight, I hope you're familiar with this, but obviously the Peatland Code can really help with it. So it's a UK government-backed domestic voluntary carbon market standard that landowners with eligible damaged peat can follow to attract private finance for peatland restoration by selling carbon units. So just a very quick overview of where we came from and where we're at. So in general, so the Peatland Code helps companies to reduce their net emissions. So through if they buy our peatland carbon units. It also helps the UK meet the national greenhouse gas targets, since all land use and land use change and forestry emissions are reported under the UK greenhouse gas inventory. And it's about peatland restoration only. And really the purpose of the Peatland Code is to underpin market trust and confidence. So it all started kind of in 2011, where there was an idea, and there was a DEFRA report written with that idea. And then some pilot projects were done over the next 4 years. And in 2015, the first version of the code was launched. 2018, we had our first project validated. At the end of 2020, together with the UK Woodland Carbon Code, we created a UK Land Carbon Registry. And in April this year, we launched version 1.2 of the code. So that version was mainly updated guidance, updated language to really conform with the ISO standards according to for UCAS, for our UCAS accreditation. And behind all of this, we've got the Market and Investment Forum. So that's for everyone with a market and economic interest into the Peatlands Code. A technical advisory board to help and advise the executive board. And we've got a Peatland Code team at the moment. That's Ad Salter, my Peatland Code officer, and myself. But we're also in the process of hopefully recruiting a technical development manager there as well. So a quick update of how many projects. So as you can see in the graph at the bottom of this, we are really quickly growing at the moment. Last year, we tripled our number of projects registered, and this year we over doubled again. So we've got 149 projects registered. And within all of those projects, it's about over 20,000 hectares of peatland restoration. And if they all do what they are saying they're going to do, it's over 4.5 million tons of CO2 equivalent emission reductions over the whole lifetime of those 149 projects. You can see most of our projects are currently in Scotland. So England, Wales, and Northern Ireland really need to catch up, I think. So version 2, like I said, we had hoped to launch it by now. it's been delayed because of a few different reasons, but mainly really busy calendars and agendas of everyone. So I'm depending on experts to help and really shape this next version, because there's really dramatic changes that are going to happen. And like, it'd be better to launch something that's really robust and everyone agrees on, instead of launching something that then is not actually right. So we're almost there. So I will give you an update today of main changes that are coming, where we're at with Fens and all of that. And then hopefully at the start of next year, I hope January, it will be launched. So the headlines of version 2 is we are obviously updating our emission factors. Fens is coming, and wet agriculture as well. So with wet agriculture here, I mean traditional crops, but then with where you can still raise your water level without changing your crop really. But you will get quite a significant emission reduction there, even by doing that partial raising of your water table. We do have to still work out some issues around additionality on there, and how to really evidence that change. So it might come in a version 2.1, but hopefully it will be included in version 2. So obviously at the moment, the only eligible peatlands under the code are blanket bog and raised bogs. So the main changes that are coming in version 2 for bogs is that we are going to most likely change the peat depth. So currently it's 50 centimeters. We're going to lower that to 30 centimeters. There's still a little bit of consultation I'm doing at the moment on that to double check, but it's most likely going to happen. Then currently you need to do peat depth measurements at a 100 by 100 meter grid. That's most likely going to change to a 50 by 50 meter grid. But to make sure it's not going to really increase too much of the work, is we are going to change that you don't have to measure your peat depth all the way to the full depth of your peat anymore, but only up to a meter. So that should really speed up your peat depth measurements. Modified is going to be included as an eligible baseline condition, but only if you are really actively going to have an intervention on that. So if you're doing bunting or anything like that, for example. And we're going to change the emission factors to be in line with the UK greenhouse gas inventory. So they'll be updated. And just to highlight for emission factors, verification will always happen to the latest emission factors. So that's all also written into the code. So initially we will set up and calculate your emission reductions at the start of your project, but they can change over time if the science changes there. So just to highlight that. So these are two tables to give you an idea of the changes in emission factors. And you can see there's still some red in these tables because we're still figuring a few things out to get out the inventory at the moment. But this first column here, emission factor 2015, is the current emission factor in the code. And then the next column, emission factor 2022, is what we are expecting them to be changing to. For people who have spotted the latest DEFRA report, you might realize that these numbers are slightly different from that report. So first of all, that report was written in AR5, so that's global warming potential of assessment report 4. So it's just an IPCC term that they use for the global warming potentials. The greenhouse gas inventory is going to change to AR5, global warming potential numbers. So that is what we're going to adopt as well. And the writers of that DEFRA report realized that there was a few issues with some of the numbers. So that report is going to be updated soon, and I have already included the new numbers in here. We're still looking, we want to have the same condition category changes as inventory users, and there's still some question marks there that I'm waiting on answers, but you can see here at the moment proposed step changes. So the initial 1 step changes that we use under the code. But yeah, keep in mind that that might change. So using that, the table on the right will show you the changes in how many carbon units you'll actually get per hectare for these changes. And you can see that the actively eroding is coming down quite significantly, where you would first get about 19 tons of CO2 equivalent emission reductions per hectare per year. And then there's still the position buffer and a risk buffer to be taken of this. And that's coming down to just about 15. But you can also see that the drains is likely to increase from 2 to 3 tons of CO2 equivalents per hectare per year. And we're still looking at which that change modified will be making. So yeah, that will come as soon as we have definite answers there. So for Fens, I can say a few things. We're still very much in the process of finalizing how exactly we want all of this to happen, especially field protocols are heavily consulted on at the moment. But in Fens, we are going to require peat coring instead of using our peat rod to measure your peat depth. Water table measurements will be required as well in Fens. And the carbon calculator will be different than what we use in bogs, so it will actually use the water table to calculate your emissions, and we'll probably use the minimum, the maximum, and the average water table there. So as I said, we are still directly consulting on mainly the field protocol for Fens, so with several Fen experts mainly in England at the moment. And it's about a water table management protocol. What is the best way forward with that? On the condition category descriptions, we're also looking at the loss rates. From literature, we got to about a 2.5 to 3 centimeters per year loss rate. And then we need to still think about the minimum peat depth. I've written here, like obviously for our bogs, our minimum project length is 30 years. And with a loss rate of 2.5 to 3 centimeters a year, you would then come to a minimum of 90 centimeters. However, I am very aware that in Fens that might be an issue. So there's still a lot of discussion going on about that minimum peat depth at the moment, and your minimum project length therefore as well. So this is just to highlight the different Fen condition categories that are being explored at the moment. In red, I've put the wasted peat, that's less than 40 centimeters, because we're not entirely sure if that will be included this time round or not. There is some good evidence that together with your water table and your percentage organic carbon in the soil, that you can actually really calculate your emission reductions. So hopefully we can at some point include that. And then we look at croplands, grasslands, modified Fen, revetted Fen, and near natural. But like I said, this will be calculated with your actual water table instead of directly linked to these categories.
Thank you, Renee. We've got a question from Rob, whether you can explain the definition of modified.
In Fens or in bogs?
Bogs. Please, Renee, thanks.
In bogs. So that is kind of like we've got actively eroding, we've got drains, and then we've got kind of an other. It's we know that it's not in a pristine state, it's not in a near natural state, but it's either overgrazed, it's malignia dominated, or it's just not the actual sphagnum. You might have too much heather as well, so it could be due to burning. So that is what we class as modified there. And then some of those might not have an active intervention, and therefore you cannot include it. But we do now see that on more and more of these sites, people use bonding to actually still raise your water table and to stop those negative impacts. But the field protocol will have a more in-depth description of that as well. Cool. I can't see you, so if there's anything else, then indeed, Simon, please just stop me. Thanks. Then additionality. So we have also consulted, we had AFTEC, an economic consultancy, to look at our financial additionality rules. And there's been ongoing work for the last couple of months and gone through technical advisory board a few times to see if and how we should change them to be as robust as we can. So test one, that's the legal test, additionality test, says that there should not be any legal requirement to actually restore your peatlands. So that will probably stay as is. However, our two financial additionality tests are at least the test 2 is likely to change. So at the moment, it says in the code that carbon finance required to fund a minimum of 15% of the project duration. However, that's going to change to a maximum of 85% public or potentially any other income. And then also with text to say that we are looking to reduce that percentage soon. So it's probably staying at 85 at the moment, but it will be signaled that it is going down. And then that carbon finance is required to make restoration economically attractive or even viable, is likely to stay, but we need to do a little bit more work on that. And then test 4 is, and if there's any other barriers that prevent implementation of the project. And we have not really come across any reason why, if you feel your economic viability test, which other barriers could that be that makes the project still additional. So this test is likely to be removed. So yeah, next steps for the Peatland Code. Like I said, this version 2 is expected at the start of next year. I will first go to all our project developers, validators, and everyone in the market to make sure that they are fully aware of the changes coming before it's then publicly launched. And then in 2023 onwards, we are going to look at a political trial or a call for evidence there to see if and when we can start to include that under the code. At the moment, there's just not enough scientific evidence to include it, hence the call for evidence there. That DEFRA report I alluded to earlier also had a section on carbon sequestration during the transitional phase. So going from bare peat to revegetated peat, where you rebuild your acrotelm and your vegetation, there's actually kind of a one-off carbon sequestration happening there. However, they could not quantify that yet. So we are going to look at how and what needs to be done to be able to quantify that and include it under the code. Then high on my list is a biodiversity metric and look into how we can start to quantify biodiversity under the code as well. Water quality and quantity metric is high up there as well. So I'm involved with the hydronation, JAS, SEPA, CEH and forest research that are already working on this. And the UCAS pilot phase is ongoing at the moment. So that's the accreditation by UCAS against the ISO standards for our validation and verification bodies. And then this new Peatland Code development officer is also going to look at, again, getting the code ACROA certified as well. Right, that was a quick whistle stop of where we are at and our next steps. But yeah, I'm very happy to take any questions.
Oh, thank you, Renee. In fact, we got an immediate question from Garth. I don't know if you can see it in the chat.
Open it up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a question about it that in Scotland, a lot of projects are done together at Peatland Action, and Peatland Action requires peat depth measurements to full depth at a 100 by 100 meter grid. So we have talked to Peatland Action about this. and highlighted to them that we are likely to make this change. They are looking internally if they are going to change anything there or not. But even like, so it might be that indeed you still need to do a 100 by 100 meter grid to full depth for peatland action, and then you're in between ones you do up to a meter for us.
Thanks for that. That's clarifies it for me. Thank you.
And a question from Sarah.
Will the water and biodiversity metrics be bundled into the carbon credit, or will this be able to be sold separately? That's to be seen. It will all depends on where the market moves. So at the moment, my focus is on getting the right metrics and to actually start to be able to quantify it. And then we will be, I hope you can still hear me. I'm getting a message that my internet is unstable. Okay, cool.
Fine, Renee.
Cool. And then, so when at the moment, obviously there isn't really a market for biodiversity credits in the UK, and not really one for water credits either. So we need to see where the market goes. If it becomes more financially viable to stack them and to sell them separate, then we definitely look into that. If not, then we might keep them bundled. But yeah, that's to be seen where the market goes.
Cool. Thanks, Renee.
Emma, I'll drop the link into the chat about where the DEFRA report is published. So I will, but like I said, there will be a update to the emission factors in there. So that should be there soon. Sorry, I'll do that right now. So 1 sec, if I can find my chat again. So that's the link. So for anybody wanting to look at this report, it is available on that link.
Okay, so we got some really good questions coming in. I'm not sure where we should pick next. Maybe from Charlie at Sylvestris Land Management. Can you explain the reasoning behind the percentage carbon finance contribution test change?
Yeah, so the reason why we initially looked at our financial additionality test was because obviously the market has moved on from 6 years ago when we launched the Peatland Code. So we just wanted to make sure that our financial additionality tests are still up to scratch and as robust as they should be. So if you look at projects and you look at 15% carbon finance, actually all projects make that. And the way we have actually been testing for already is we've been testing in our additionality spreadsheet for a maximum of 85% public funding, but it was written the wrong way around in the actual code. So it made sense to officially swap that around. We've had quite a few conversations in the Technical Advisory Board about that percentage. Should it stay at 85 or are we ready to lower it? And we couldn't really come to a consensus. Hence why for now, we're going to retain it at 85, but making a really clear market statement that it is coming down in the near future. And I'm not sure if your question is in general, why do you allow even public funding into this? But that is because it is actually still really hard to do it on the 100% carbon finance with the current carbon price.
Does that answer your question, Natalie? If so, we'll take
yes,
it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take a question from Stuart Burbridge. You've got your hand raised.
Hello, thank you, Renee. I've got a few questions, but I'll probably just go with one at a time. To do with the funding you just mentioned, is that 85% upfront capital works? Does that only include the contractor costs? Because it depends on how Peatland Action are funding and therefore are maintenance costs included or not? I know Peatland Action are looking at wrapping in possible maintenance costs included going forward, and therefore the pot of 100 or 85% will be stretched a lot further. So just which definitions are you working to, do you think?
So we're not really changing that definition at the moment. So it's 85% of the full project length. So cost over, that includes capital cost and ongoing management and maintenance costs.
Okay, grand. Yeah, I'll probably let other people jump in before I go with something else. Thanks.
Do you want me to just take one from the chat, Simon, or?
Yeah, if there's anything which strikes you. I mean, I think probably a lot of the questions in the chat, maybe some of them you'll just take on board, and maybe we can provide a bit of a formal Q&A response afterwards. I mean, I've got the emails of everyone, so we can distribute some answers to the questions if Renee can't get through all of them. But yeah, is there anyone there which you think is worth picking out? I mean, there's one from Amy, which obviously relates to biodiversity credits, but there's one about water level data.
Yeah, I'll take the one from Amy about, do you anticipate the inclusion of biodiversity credits will stop projects being able to take part in the DEFRA BNG biodiversity net gain scheme, or will they complement? Biodiversity net gain is a compliance market. So projects they are legally bound to actually compensate and to therefore buy these BNG credits. Therefore, it actually doesn't pass our legal additionality test. So you cannot stack a biodiversity net gain credits with a voluntary carbon credit. You can, however, potentially stack a voluntary biodiversity credits with a voluntary carbon credit. So it would be a completely different market, these biodiversity credits from the compliance BNG market.
Thank you. And Stuart, you've got your hand raised again. Was that from before?
No, it is a fresh one. Just going back to the 1 meter depth, how are you anticipating that will affect eligibility criteria for the project?
What do you mean?
So if your depths are, as I understand it, I'm guessing bounded by 1 meter and 30 centimeters, will there still be a minimum project length duration based upon the average of depths?
Yes, so
there'll be no offset by deeper depths is I suppose the point of my question.
Yeah, so the way that the rules already work at the moment is that 75% of your peat depth points need to be over the minimum peat depth required for your project length. So if you want to have a 60-year project, 75% of your peat depth points need to be over 60 centimeters. I'm talking about bogs at the moment, so Fens will be different. So if you measure, we don't allow for projects over 100 years. So 100 years is the maximum. So therefore, you need to show that 75% of your peat depths are over 1 meter. Hence why we say you don't need to measure any deeper than a meter, because actually it's not going to increase your project length anyway.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And just quickly, are the emissions factors going to be tied to the same descriptive text, or is that changing?
So we're going to include a few, like I showed in that table. So the inventory has actually a few more condition categories. They are kind of linked with our old ones, but not fully. And I'm talking to the greenhouse gas inventory people about the best way of having those step changes. There's now more data than there was 6 years ago, so it makes sense to include that. So it will be reasonably similar, but there might be a few small changes, but nothing major there.
It will be based on a text description, not a water table depth or anything else.
In bogs, it will be text. Yes, indeed.
Okay, grand. I'll let Freddie jump in.
Hello. Thanks, Renee, for this. Really appreciate it. Not necessarily linked really to anything discussed so far, but the verification and validation processes kind of continue to be a bugbear for a lot of the developer community in terms of the turnaround times, particularly post restoration visits. And I was wondering whether within version 2.0 there's any improved guidance for the validation process to help streamline that process, or whether the code is giving any support to the validators themselves. Kind of first point. And the second thing is perhaps obviously in June next year, the first verification's coming up. And again, is there expected to be additional guidance to the developer community around ensuring that those the necessary requirements are met for verification? I appreciate the guidance for 1.2 began that process, but I was wondering whether there was anything further going to come out around that. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So around validations, like what we already do with the validators, we have like monthly meetings and also monthly meetings with both validators. There has just been a third validator approved. So that's SAC Consulting, which will hope, so there will be mainly Scotland initially, which will hopefully help with that really long wait time for projects. Guidance, like I have consulted directly with both validators at the moment about what they think we should increase, update or make clearer in our guidance that would help streamline their processes. There's small minor changes coming, nothing really that stood out that we should change from their point of view, but it's more about making sure that we have enough capacity, basically. And the verification, there is now a progress report template that you need to fill in for your verification. And we are kind of working through if whatever needs to be included during this first verification to make sure that we've got everything there.
Thanks, Renee.
No problem.
Stuart's back keen again by the looks of it.
I'll take the question, Stuart.
Yeah, sorry to keep jumping in.
Well, anyone else on the call is welcome to join in as well. So
Oh, please do. With the modified to drained, are there any techniques that have a scientific backing in terms of changing modified to, sorry, not modified to drained, modified to near natural? And is there a slight worry that if you're on a text description, so bunding, for instance, you're not actually helping the peatland, but you might be creating pools that weren't there otherwise and increase sphagnum cover, which kind of might change the category without actually doing anything underlying that? Yeah,
so we are looking into what we would need to evidence that you indeed reduce your emissions there, because it is not that straightforward as blocking a drain. So that's still ongoing at the moment to see what we need. Obviously, there is some basic stuff that you can do: stop burning, stop overgrazing, which will help and will reduce, should reduce your emissions if you then get your peatlands back into healthy and functioning. But yeah, no, I appreciate what you're saying. It's true, and we are looking into how we can actually evidence that emission reduction.
Grand. And I presume that won't be retrospectively applied. I'm just in thinking about owners who currently reduce grazing dramatically and do have wider peatland interventions, but no machines on the ground on that kind of modified ground.
Yeah, no, probably not retrospective. No.
Okay, that's grand. Just to jump on a similar point, if you are bringing in water quality and biodiversity, might they be retrospectively accounted for?
I've had some discussions around that. Probably not, and that's all to do with your additionality. Like we need to check additionality for the project at the start, and we need to check that they really needed the carbon finance, and if we add in biodiversity and water quality as a stack, then we need to check that they need all of that
Yeah.
money to come in. If it is a bundled credit, then we can potentially look at actually quantifying that for others as well. Retrospectively, potentially is an option there to just make that stronger, but that slightly different than if it is going to be stacked. So yeah.
Do you think that could be checked retrospectively? So a project that is at year 10, recheck the additionality to see if it would meet that criteria.
I'll need to do some more thinking around that.
Maybe.
Happy to discuss that further at some point.
All right. Thank you, Franson. Appreciate it.
Yes.
I think there's going to be some really interesting things, as Renee says, depending on how the biodiversity credit market evolves, where maybe additionality isn't seen as important to some of the biodiversity credit methodologies as it has been for the carbon codes. I'm wary that Freddie, you've got a question, and also I don't know, is it Mike or Mike? You've got some good questions there as well. So we'll take Freddie first, and then if Mike wants to ask his questions.
So my question was actually just jumping into one of the chat questions that I don't think was picked up on, which was from Heinz around the surveying work done in 2022, because obviously it takes quite a long time to develop some of these projects, and whether or not there'll be a grace period for that. I think perhaps, yeah, I would suggest a grace period for the frequency of peat depth measurements to allow those that have put a lot of time and effort into surveying that maybe can't get the rest of it under the wire.
No, definitely. I was going to get to that question indeed, because I thought it was a really important one. There's always a grace periods when we launch new guidance. Usually that's 3 months, but I appreciate that if we change like actual field protocol as dramatically, there will be a bit more there for indeed projects that were surveyed in 2022. And we need to look at the exact timings, but yes, I appreciate that you cannot just go back out and double or quadruple some of your effort there.
Cool, thank you. And questions from is it Mike or Mike? I don't know if you'd like to come on to the mic and ask the questions, or Renee, you've got those questions from or the latest ones on the chat.
Yeah, sure. Oh, I think there's some. Hi, do you want to ask them, or?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, whichever you prefer, but yeah, I had a few questions about the water table level. Well, first of all, you were mentioning you're changing the grid from 100 by 100 to 50 by 50 meters now. So I was wondering, in the fence that you're including now, are you going to measure water table levels also with automated loggers, or only at the survey points in the grid, or how do you imagine that? Yeah,
so that's the main thing that we are still consulting on at the moment with Fen experts. It will not be at every 50 by 50 interval, because that's just too much. So it will most likely be transactional, so transact and then potentially making sure, depending on how fluctuating they are, making sure that you've got some on the edge or some more in the middle as well. So they'll slightly depend on site. We will write a protocol for minimum requirements. So the minimum that you could get away with, which looks like will probably be rust rods, and then with 1 or 2 autologgers there as well. But we don't think all of it has to be autologgers, because that's just too expensive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's still going on.
Yeah, so I was wondering, maybe you require like 1 automated logger per site, but then it depends, of course, on how big a site would be, because if you have a couple 100 hectares, I mean, 1 logger might not be enough. But that's what I was wondering, do you have maybe an idea already to what size would require maybe a permanent logger or something like that?
I think probably all sites would require a permanent logger, and then rust rods more scattered. Yeah.
Okay. And you were mentioning a minimum. What do you already have a number? No.
Nope.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was one of my other questions. And then I had a question actually about leakage. So if there's this example that you have a piece of peatland that is under tenure, and there's a contract, and then the tenant would get all the emission reduction benefits, and well, he would have the rights to the reduction. Does the owner actually also have to comply with those rules? Because he might have another peatland somewhere, and then maybe there could be leakage happening somewhere on the owner's side. So I was wondering, do they both have to comply, or only the person who is actually working on the land or having the rights to the reductions?
So leakage only, like we only look at leakage that's directly linked to your project. So because you're restoring your peatland here, you are directly, as a direct result, increasing your emissions somewhere else. So for example, you're reducing your grazing pressure at your site where you're restoring, but you're therefore increasing it somewhere else. And that will result in higher emissions somewhere else. Only that is called leakage. So only emissions that are direct results from your restoration project. So only, yeah, a direct link. So it's not generally if there is any other emissions on the site or on the owner's land or anything like that. It's only if it's because of what you do in your restoration project.
Okay, I get it. All right, thanks.
No problem.
And we've got a question from Emily Taylor. Is the bog eroding, drained, undrained categories characterized? Yeah, there we go. Hi, Emily.
Yeah, hi, Renee. So it was just a technical question there on the definitions of those new categories. I'm just wondering if they've been established yet, or if that's to come.
So I'm just tracking. So I was just looking at your question.
It was the actively eroding drain versus undrained, and I just assume that's the presence absence of artificial drains within a defined area.
So no, that's the actively, so that links directly to actively eroding hag gullies, so drained or actively eroding flat bare undrained.
Okay, thank you.
Great, and this might have already been covered. Apologies if I didn't spot. Joe Finlow asked, why has the change to 50 by 50 grids been made?
So that's been something that the validators were pushing for and really highlighted over the past couple of months, that we require projects to measure, to draw their drains and hags and gullies on the map, and then there goes a 30-meter buffer around that. So if you only measure your peat depth at 100 by 100 meter grid, you quite often miss, you don't get that really detailed information about your peat depths that you need for those 30-meter buffers. And in some sites, that's really causing some issues there. Hence why they've been pushing for a more peat depths on a closer grid. And why we then changed to only up to 1 meter to hopefully not really increase that burden too much.
Thank you. And a question from Fernanda. Apologies, Stuart. I've bumped you just for a minute. We'll get around to your question as well. Fernanda?
All right, hi. Yeah, just trying to unmute myself. Yeah, and apologies, I didn't realize I bumped Stuart out of the way. So I know that you were looking at trying to tie the Peatland Code closer to water table measurements. If you're not actually measuring requiring water table measurements in the Peatland Code, is there anything that's driving a move to interventions that are more likely to restore the water table? For example, in severely eroded gullies, reprofiling them perhaps might not might not have much of an impact on the water table? And secondly, is there still an ambition to, in the future and future versions of the Peatland Code, bring in direct water table measurements?
So yeah, we consulted with all current project developers and the technical advisory board on making water table measurements a requirement in bogs as well. There's quite an overwhelming feedback from project developers that please don't make it a requirement, potentially have it as an option there. And considering my time pressure to get version 2 launched and the amount of projects waiting on Fens mainly to come in, I've decided to not include it in version 2, because that would mean pushing it back even further to create that protocol there. Potentially we will include it as an option in a 2.1 or 2.2 in bogs as well. I also think that remote sensing at some point is going to help with checking if you've really raised your water table and how your peatlands are reacting to your interventions, but we are slightly off from being able to use that yet. But yeah, sorry, I hope that answers your question, hopefully at some point.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Renee.
And Stuart.
Yeah, Fern stole my question there. So just to clarify on that, the consensus is that it will move towards a water table measurement as opposed to a text description eventually, just because of time pressure. It's not happened at the moment.
It will likely be included as an optional, so not a requirement to do the water table measurements. More as if you want to evidence it more robustly as a project developer, then we've got a protocol to follow that and to do that. And then, like I said, I think the remote sensing technology in the future will also start to help with that.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose linking with that, the original, as far as I gather, the original research was based upon gullies that are relatively small, and I think that was based upon drainage channels. So are you looking at redefining emissions based upon more severe ground that is now being incorporated into projects? So either very, very large peat pans or 2-meter gullies kind of thing?
No, so the emission factors and the condition categories that we have will, like the emission factors obviously will be updated, but the condition categories that we have will remain the same, because we don't have enough data across the UK to split that out further. So we have to stick with what we have at the moment.
Okay, no, that's grand. And just a slightly deviated point. In version 2.0, will there be clarification on what evidence is required? So I know we are now, or have been, I think, allowed to use drone footage as opposed to many photos on every grid point, which will now double with 50 meters. So will there be clarity over that?
Oh, I should have included that. So that requirement of fixed point photographs at every grid point will stop as well, will change to actually taking pictures of
the features,
to restore features, because that makes way more sense. And there will also be guidance indeed on what kind of drone footage you can and cannot use, as well as some guidance on their peat classifiers as well, on what we need as ground truthing evidence.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And Fernanda.
Hi again. So you mentioned that the requirement or the water table measurements would be optional to help evidence water table change. Does that mean when you are looking to validate and verify projects, you're looking for a water table change? I think my question is particularly, I'm particularly thinking about the drainage area surrounding Hag Gully, for example, where certain interventions in the Hag Gully might not have any visual impact on the surrounding area.
if you're going to include it as an optional, then we need to do a bit more work on exactly what and how that will be included. Like I said, I've not had any headspace to really do it, and because of that feedback that we got, I didn't feel like it was the right use of my time at this point. So I will get back to you when and if we include it in that. Sorry.
Thank you, Renee.
Thanks. And a question from Sarah.
Hi, yeah, my question is really a look forward. I'm wondering when and if you are planning to do any version 3. I'm just wondering how regularly we can expect updates to the field protocol and that kind of thing, just for planning our long-term programs and how to schedule surveys in for stuff that probably won't actually be delivered for a number of years.
That's a good point. I don't really have an answer to that, which is not helpful. I appreciate. It was one of the questions that we've put to the technical advisory board of like, how often should we revise all of this? And there's very little feedback. So we're looking probably to at least revise it internally every year to see if there needs to be an update. This version 2 is a really big update because of the Fens and all of that. And I don't expect really big updates anytime soon, but small updates to field protocol, especially in the Fens, will probably be quite soon again, because we're now going to start using it, and they're bound to be things that need to change or don't work if you start using it. But that would be smaller changes. I think what we do need to do as a Peatland Code, we need to think a bit more about how do we deal with projects that were indeed surveyed 2 years in advance, and what if then a field protocol requirement changes, how do we deal with that? So that's a good flag. I am going to write it down and get that, get some decisions on that.
Okay, thank you.
Great, well, we're coming up to our hour, so does anyone else have any other questions for Renee? Otherwise, we can close the meeting. Stuart.
Sorry, last one from me, I promise. Is there any update, I think kind of going off the back of Sarah's question, any update on forest to bog being included at the moment?
A bit of a sigh there. So we are really actively working on it. So together with RSPB at the moment, RSPB Scotland, and Ian, our program officer, is writing kind of a briefing on where are we, what kind of evidence is missing, because that's not really been done for a long time. And then we're looking indeed at how can we really push this forward. I know James Hutton is actually have just put a few towers on first to bog sites, also on second rotation sites in Scotland. So the evidence is building up, but it appears that there's still not enough evidence to actually move forward for the Peatland Code.
Okay.
So yeah, working on that.
Grand. I suppose slightly linking to that, have you reached out to Douglas Campbell at all in terms of data for that kind of thing?
His name definitely rings a bell, but I will double check that.
Okay, no worries. Appreciate that.
Great. Well, thank you for everyone for participating today. Great questions from everyone, whether it's in the chat or on video. And a big thank you to Renee for all the excellent work she's doing. And we're all going to send her lots of warm wishes for Christmas and the launch of the code in the new year.